There are moments in history when an entire world holds its breath and waits. In the summer of 1522, the island fortress of Rhodes, the final stronghold of the Knights of St. John, stood alone against a rising empire. It should have been an ordinary dawn, quiet waves, gulls circling above the harbor, and warm sunlight brushing the ancient walls. But on this day, the sea changed color. A dark line appeared along the horizon. Then another. Ships, hundreds of them. The greatest fleet the Mediterranean had ever seen. At its head stood an aging but relentless ruler, Sultan Suleiman, the young Ottoman titan determined to erase the Knights forever. For years, the Ottomans had expanded across continents, unstoppable, unchallenged. Now only one obstacle remained, a fortress of stone and faith, perched on a lonely island, defended by men who had already accepted they might never leave it alive. The Knights knew what the arrival of that fleet meant. No reinforcements, no escape, no surrender. If Rhodes fell, the Christian world's last shield in the Eastern Mediterranean would shatter. If it survived, history would change. The first Ottoman cannon fired just after sunrise. Its thunder rolled across the sea, slow, deep, and final. Every man on the walls felt the stones tremble beneath his boots. Every civilian in the city froze, breath caught in their throat. The siege had begun, and the world was about to watch one of the greatest tests of courage, endurance, and sacrifice ever written into the Mediterranean winds. But no one, neither sultan nor knight, could imagine how far the battle would push them, or how high a price both sides would pay before the gates of Rhodes finally closed for the last time. For the people of Rhodes, the morning of June 26, 1522 began like a nightmare slowly taking form. The horizon, which at dawn had been empty, was now carved by towering Ottoman warships pushing through the sunlit waves, their sails swelling like the wings of some vast, unstoppable storm. At first, the city watched in silence. Fishermen froze at the docks. Mothers pulled their children indoors. Even the gulls seemed to quiet, circling high above the harbor, as if sensing that nothing on this island would ever be the same again. The fleet kept growing. 10 ships became 20, 20 became 50. Soon the entire sea seemed alive, shifting with hundreds of galleys, transports, siege barges, and floating artillery platforms. And then, the flagship came into view. Its bow was carved with curling Ottoman designs that glimmered under the rising sun. At its stern stood a man whose presence alone radiated command. Sultan Suleiman, only 28 years old, yet already ruling one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. He wore no crown today. He did not need one. Behind him stood 100,000 soldiers, janissaries, sipahi cavalry, sappers, arquebusiers, and the most feared artillery corps in the Mediterranean. They had crossed mountains, deserts, and roaring seas for one purpose: to erase the Knights of St. John from history. Inside the city walls, Grand Master Philippe Villiers de l'Isle Adam surveyed the approaching armada from the highest tower of the fortress. He was an old man, his hair turned silver by battles that had taken more friends than years ever could. Beside him stood the last surviving defenders of the order, a few thousand knights and soldiers, weathered, loyal, and painfully aware that every man in the city depended on them. Still, there was no fear in the Grand Master's voice, only resolve. "They have come," he whispered, "but so have we." He knew the math was merciless. Against the Ottoman Empire's vast power, Rhodes was a stone in a river. But a stone, if well placed, could split water for a very long time. At midday, Suleiman sent his first message, a formal demand for surrender. The knights read it, folded it, and sent it back without a signature. The meaning was clear. If the Ottomans wanted Rhodes, they would have to take it stone by stone, drop of blood by drop of blood. Suleiman nodded when he received the reply. He expected nothing less. To him, this was more than a campaign. It was a test of will, of faith, of destiny itself. He raised his hand. A single signal torch ignited above his flagship. Across the sea, 1,000 drums answered. The invasion had begun. The Ottomans wasted no time. At dawn on the second day, the calm air around Rhodes shattered under the roar of hundreds of cannons positioned along the shoreline and on siege barges that creaked under their own weight. The first volley hit the outer walls like an earthquake. Stone trembled, dust exploded into the sky, and deep within the fortress, families huddled together as every window rattled in its frame. For the Knights of St. John, this was no ordinary bombardment. It was the sound of an empire announcing its intention to grind Rhodes into dust. On the ramparts, the defenders held their ground. Their armor gleamed beneath the rising sun, battered but unbroken. These men had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment, standing firm where others would flee, holding the line even when the world demanded they surrender. Grandmaster Leal Adam walked the walls in silence, his hands clasped behind his back. Every explosion lit his face for a fraction of a second, but not once did he flinch. To him, courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to stand in spite of it. Below, Ottoman engineers worked tirelessly, driving tunnels into the earth, digging closer and closer to the wall foundations. They planned to set explosives beneath the stones, to bring the fortress down from underneath, one breach at a time. But the knights were watching. Every night the defenders pressed their ears to the ground, listening for the faintest tremor, the smallest echo of picks and shovels in the darkness. And when they found a tunnel, they counterdug, meeting their unseen enemies in cramped, suffocating chambers where neither sunlight nor mercy existed. It was war reduced to whispers and shadows. No banners, no speeches, only the scrape of steel, the gasp of breath, the fall of bodies in the dark. Above ground, the city changed. Streets once filled with children and merchants now echoed with the creak of wagons carrying rubble and sandbags. Every church became a shelter. Every home became a workshop for arrows, bolts, and makeshift bandages. And still, the cannons did not stop. Day after day, night after night, the walls that had endured centuries now bled stone like an open wound. One morning, as the sun spilled gold across the harbor, a thunderous blast shook the entire city. The Tower of St. Nicholas, the guardian of the northern seawall, erupted in a cloud of shattered masonry. An Ottoman cannonball, larger than a man's chest, had found its mark. The knights rushed forward. Civilians followed with buckets of sand and wood. Together they fought the fire, rebuilt the barricade, filled every gap the bombardment tore open. Because the people of Rhodes understood something their enemy could not measure. A fortress is more than walls. It is the people who refuse to abandon it. That morning, the Ottomans saw something unexpected, something that irritated their commanders and fascinated their sultan. Rhodes still stood, bruised, bleeding, but unbroken. And that meant this siege was going to be much longer, much harder, and far more costly than anyone had predicted. By late July, the constant thunder of artillery had carved deep wounds into Rhodes. Entire sections of the medieval walls sagged under their own weight. Towers leaned like exhausted giants. And yet, behind the ruins, the defenders still stood ready. But on July 24th, 1522, the siege reached a breaking point. Just before noon, a massive Ottoman mine detonated beneath the Spanish tower, tearing open a breach wide enough for 30 men to charge through side by side. The ground buckled. A cloud of dust swallowed the sky. For several long seconds, no one could see anything, only hear the rumble of collapsing stone. Then came the roar. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers surged forward, their shields lifted, their battle cries shaking the air. Janissaries in white turbans led the charge, disciplined, relentless, their boots pounding the earth in terrifying unison. It was the moment Suleiman had been waiting for. A breach, a doorway into the heart of a stubborn island. But the knights had been waiting too. When the dust finally cleared, the attackers found something they had not expected. The defenders were already inside the breach, forming a human wall. Knights in battered armor, militiamen holding spears with trembling hands, priests carrying cross-shaped banners, standing unarmed between the living and the doomed. The clash was immediate. Swords struck shields. Arrows hissed from rooftops. The stones underfoot turned slick as the narrow breach became a funnel of violence. The knights fought like men with nothing left to lose. They pushed with shields, swung with maces, and used the very rubble beneath them as weapons. One eyewitness later wrote that the fighting was so close, no man could lift his arm without striking friend or foe alike. For 3 hours, the Ottomans hurled themselves into the breach. For 3 hours, the knights refused to break. Then, miraculously, the defenders counterattacked. With a shout that echoed across the ruins, they surged forward, driving the Ottoman line back through the smoke-filled gap. A young knight tore down an enemy banner and planted the flag of the order in its place, shouting to the sky as if daring the entire empire to push forward again. When the fighting finally slowed, the breach was a mound of bodies, Ottoman and Christian, stacked so high that soldiers walked across them like a bridge. And yet somehow, impossibly, the line had held. But the victory came at a terrible price. Inside the medical halls, the wounded lay in rows, men missing arms, legs, eyes. Children carried water to the surgeons. Women tore sheets into bandages, while priests whispered prayers for men who would not last the night. The Grand Master visited every injured defender he could. To each of them, he gave the same promise. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten, and we will not yield. But outside the walls, the Ottomans were preparing something far worse. Because if one breach had failed, they would make another, and another, and another. Suleiman was determined. If Rhodes wanted to resist an empire, then the empire would show them the full weight of what resistance cost. Night fell, and in the silence between cannon blasts, every defender felt the same truth. The next assault was coming, and it would be bigger than anything they had faced so far. By early December, the siege had lasted 5 brutal months. The walls of Rhodes were no longer walls. They were jagged skeletons of stone, patched and repatched with wood, sandbags, and the shattered remains of towers that had once guarded entire generations. Every night brought something worse. A new mine beneath the walls, a new breach, a new wave of janissaries appearing out of the smoke, like ghosts made of iron and discipline. But now, something else began to break. The people. Inside the battered city, thousands of civilians lived in conditions no human heart should endure. Food had dwindled. Wells ran low. The constant bombardment shook the city so violently that mothers slept sitting up, afraid the next collapse would bury their children beneath rubble. In one narrow alley, a woman tried to shield her infant as dust fell from every window frame. Nearby, an elderly man prayed beneath what remained of a church arch, a single stone curve against a sky filled with ash. And every sunrise, the same drumbeat returned from the Ottoman camp. Slow, inevitable, like the ticking of a clock counting down the island's final hour. The knights still fought with iron conviction, but even they could see the truth. The people they swore to protect were reaching their limit. Grand Master Lyle Adam felt it most of all. He saw it in the faces of the wounded, in the hopeless eyes of families approaching him in silence, in the way the defenders, once unbreakable, now leaned on their spears at dawn as if the night itself had stolen their strength. But it was a single event that finally forced his hand. On December 18th, after days of mining, the Ottomans detonated another massive explosion beneath the English tower, tearing open the largest breach yet. The ground shook as if the island itself cried out in pain. Before the dust settled, janissaries flooded forward, relentless, precise. The defenders rushed to meet them. The clash was apocalyptic. Men fought atop crumbling stones that fell away beneath their boots. Arrows flew so thick the sky dimmed. Shields splintered. Walls bled dust. The breach narrowed, widened, narrowed again as bodies filled the gap faster than anyone could pull them away. But something was different this time. The knights were outnumbered, outmatched, outworn, not by lack of courage, but by the simple, merciless mathematics of exhaustion. After 3 harrowing hours, the defenders managed to seal the breach again, but only just. Many of the bravest lay dead. Others were too wounded to stand. The city could not endure another assault of that scale. That night, the Grand Master walked the ruined streets alone. He passed broken wells, shattered homes, and families huddled around tiny fires, trying to stay warm as winter winds swept through the holes in the walls. Every step scraped against grief. When he reached the ramparts, he looked out toward the Ottoman camp. A forest of tents glowing red beneath torchlight, stretching farther than the eye could see. He knew what he had to do, what no knight ever wanted to do, not because he lacked courage, but because courage alone was no longer enough to save his people. The next morning, with the last strength of a man carrying the weight of an entire island, Grand Master Liel Adam sent word to Sultan Suleiman. He wished to discuss terms. For the first time in 5 months, the cannons fell silent. A hush rolled across Rhodes. A silence so heavy it felt like a final breath before the last word of a long prayer. The Siege of Rhodes was nearing its end, not with a final charge, but with a decision forged in grief, sacrifice, and the love of a leader for his dying city. But the terms of surrender, those would be unlike anything the Ottoman Empire had ever granted before. Because even in defeat, the Knights of Rhodes still had one more legacy to carve into history. The negotiations began in a silence so deep that even the sea seemed to listen. For days, envoys moved between the ruined gates of Rhodes and the majestic tent of Sultan Suleiman. Neither side spoke loudly. There was no victory parade, no humiliation, no triumphant roar of conquest. Only the quiet weight of a war that had tested every human limit. Suleiman, though victorious, was not blind to what the knights had endured. He had watched them repel assault after assault, standing against an empire with a defiance that bordered on the impossible. Against all expectations, he felt something rare for a commander: respect. The Grand Master, meanwhile, entered the Sultan's tent with the exhaustion of a man who had poured out every breath he owned, but with a dignity that even despair could not break. Their meeting was brief. Their words were simple, but the meaning behind them would echo for centuries. Suleiman agreed to terms unheard of in the history of the Ottoman wars. The knights would leave Rhodes unharmed. Civilians who wished to depart could do so safely. Churches would remain standing. No looting, no massacre, no chains for the defeated. It was, in its own way, a miracle carved out of ruin. On January 1st, 1523, as the first dawn of the new year spread gold across the sea, the Knights of St. John assembled in the harbor. Their armor was dented, their banners torn, their faces hollowed by 5 months of siege, but their posture remained unbroken. They boarded the ships that Suleiman himself provided. Behind them, the people of Rhodes stood watching, some crying softly, some praying, some simply staring in disbelief at the men who had defended them until nothing was left to give. A silence fell as the ships began to move. The knights did not cheer. The Ottomans did not jeer. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold still. Two enemies joined not by hatred, but by the shared memory of suffering and courage. From the highest point of the departing ship, Grand Master Liel Adam looked back at the fortress he had sworn to protect. What remained of the walls rose through the morning mist like broken teeth. Smoke curled from collapsed towers. The city stood wounded, but alive. He whispered words that no one around him heard. "Forgive me and remember us." Behind him, the sails caught wind. Rhodes grew smaller, the sea grew wider, and the knights sailed into exile, not defeated, but transformed. For though they lost their island, they kept their honor, their brotherhood, their purpose. In time, they would find a new home, a new fortress, a new chapter waiting beyond the horizon. But the Siege of Rhodes, this impossible struggle of faith, stone, fire, and will, remained their greatest testament. A reminder to the world that sometimes the most powerful legacy is not victory, but the way one chooses to endure defeat.